Welcome to The Business Behind Your Business, the podcast where we delve into the financial strategies and insights that drive success for small and medium-sized business owners. I'm your host, Paul Sweeney, and in each episode we bring you expert guests who share practical advice, real-world experiences, and actionable tips to empower you on your business journey. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur or just starting out, get ready to uncover the secrets to success and gain valuable insights into the business behind your business. Welcome back to the Business Behind Your Business podcast, where we're looking to help you grow your business, help you adopt the strategies to help you thrive in whichever market, whichever environment you're operating in at the moment. And it leads us to our question today, and that is, what if the key to your success, your business success, isn't just about survival, but it's about the strategic transformation, the strategic direction that you choose to take? And we've constantly bombarded with change. We've got changes to government, we've got changes to conditions, changes to operating environments constantly facing us. And it is a struggle. But how do we respond to that? And what do we look for? What are the things that we need to be doing as a business owner to set ourselves up, set our business up for success? And we're looking today at this whole idea of restructuring and turnaround, which has a bit of a bad feel about it, because most people think of, I only need to think about restructure and turnaround when things are going really bad. And yes, that is the case, but there are plenty of opportunities, and our guest today is going to help us unpack some of these opportunities. I want to lead with one of his quotes that I saw recently, where he says, "I've learned that every challenge is an opportunity, but only if the right strategy is in place," which I think just captures where we are at as business owners completely. So today, joining us on the Business Behind Your Business podcast is James Martin, who's the managing partner at ACM Capital Partners. And James has got over 2 decades of experience, corporate restructures, turnaround, worked in across borders, across countries, across industries, so some great experience. Worked with companies, restored more than $800 million of value to private companies, raised over $500 million of capital. He's experienced with financial advisory, strategic renewal, mergers, acquisitions, bankruptcy guidance, and he's led some businesses through some very tough times, which, it'd be great to hear about some of those and just the strategy to come out the other side stronger and more profitable. Look, James, welcome to the Business Behind Your Business.
Thank you, Paul. I'm grateful to be here.
Look, I'm looking forward to our conversation because, as is always the case, we do have a bit of a conversation before we hit record. And some of the insights that you've already shared have been absolutely fascinating. But let's address the elephant in the room. When we talk about turnaround and recovery, are we only talking about businesses that are actually in deep financial crisis?
No, and I like to call it a paradigm shift, right? I think that's a much better depiction of what one may encounter as they're stepping into a situation, or if they're already in a situation where and the other thing too is so many factors can come into play, right? It can be the industry in which one operates that is going through a tremendous shift, or it could be the management team that has basically fallen away from one another and they're not aligned anymore. Or you can have high interest rates. Sound familiar? We're dealing with that today, right? So all of a sudden, when you were servicing your debt and it was a very small piece of your cash flow, it's now a variable and you're paying a lot more today. And so you've got to pay attention to that. So there's just so many factors that one needs to remember or take into account through this paradigm shift, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking, it is a change of paradigm. So a change of way of looking at, how does our business need to be operating today in response to a change that's happened somewhere that's affecting what we do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, today let's talk about the big issue that we certainly are talking about in the States, and that is tariffs, right? And what impact do tariffs have, for the consumer, but also for the manufacturer that is sourcing while they're manufacturing here. And you hear a lot about, well, we want to bring manufacturing back. That's great, but if you're sourcing externally, right? Or outside of the country, you're dealing with tariffs, even though you're manufacturing here. And I had that situation in a company that I was recently serving as a CEO. And you all of a sudden are burdened with tariffs that you weren't the day before. So how do you maneuver through that? And it in my experience, and by the way, I encountered not tariffs necessarily, but I encountered in Eastern Europe shortly after the wall fell, VAT coming into play for the Eastern Bloc countries. And so I happened to be in an Eastern Bloc country and I was looking at VAT taxes of 18 to 22% on top of what you're bringing into the country in from various countries in Europe. So, there's always going to be those challenges, as you mentioned, like that. And so the question then becomes, what do you do when those things are happening? Well, firstly, I always tell my group that are working with me, my staff, you've got to be anticipating changes. You got to be aware of the marketplace and you got to be able to be in a position to shift pretty quickly. So what does that mean? Well, in the case of, let's say, tariffs, you reach out to your suppliers and you say to your suppliers, again, it's just an example, look, this is all temporary or it's transitionary. Let's work on a program whereby we both absorb some of the hit, and then we can 6 months from now or a year from now we can regroup, we can reassess and see who's been damaged more or not, right? And then you can recalculate. But why should I absorb all of it when you still want to supply to me? So there's different ways to do this, and there's different ways to make your suppliers your partners, which goes back to strategy and one strategy. And I always tell people the most critical part of strategy is to ensure that your strategy is aligned with all of your constituents, right? So if I have a team like my management team that perhaps is aligned with me from a strategy standpoint, but my strategy is not aligned with my suppliers, i.e., the tariffs, or it's not aligned with my customer base or the governmental regulations, then I've got a problem, right? So you're constantly trying to get your various constituents in alignment with the strategy that you pursue.
It's interesting there that you mentioned talking to your suppliers and having that strategy conversation. I think that's something very different to how a lot of business owners approach this situation, because a lot of them have, I would say, it's an adversarial approach to their suppliers. They're not necessarily working with them. They're trying to, it's like a battle to get the best deal out of your suppliers, and it's not, there's no trust involved in that situation. So it's very much a us versus them, which is not a great way to build a business relationship. So we need to get over that hurdle or that pride factor of not being willing to talk to our suppliers. Because if you think about it, your suppliers are a key part of your process. And if you're not willing to trust them, then you're really damaging your process and putting yourself at a greater risk, because they might say, well, hang on, we've just been approached by your competitor and they're being a lot more open and they're talking to us, and what, we can only supply so much. So we like dealing with them better because they're more open and upfront with us. We're going to supply with them, and it means we're not going to supply you as much. So, yeah.
Or if they do continue to supply you, they may change the payment terms, right? They may change the amount of their commitment to you. And all of a sudden you're sitting there flat-footed because you don't have an alternate source of supply. So what I think you're spot on. I think what happens oftentimes is that we take that relationship for granted. And all of a sudden, again, a situation occurs, be it tariffs, be it other issues, where COVID is a perfect example, by the way. I was running a company, about 120 million. I stepped in and they were having some issues. Well, COVID hits, all of their suppliers were in China. So the business within 6 months was gone because they only sourced from China. So if you remember in COVID, I mean, I know you were literally closer to China than we are. So, but if you remember, right, you had Chinese New Year, then you had a few months where there was no activity out of China. And so this group could not survive. They absolutely could not survive because nothing was coming across in containers. So it's a dangerous place to put your company in and to put your investors in and the like, right? When you are relying on one source and certainly relying on one country, because China demonstrated that that's a dangerous avenue, right? So it for me, and then you're so right about treating them as an adversary. When I was younger and foolish, I would I would consider negotiating to the point where my supplier was waving a white flag and thinking I had accomplished something, right? When in reality, you're hurting them financially, and before you know it, you may end up buying inferior product. So it's so important to have a great relationship with your suppliers because that will open up, as you know, a better source of supply, but also open up better terms.
Mm. Yeah, there's a few other things that jump out at me there. Is if you're negotiating down the price, you're negotiating down the profit that your supplier's making, you're increasing the risk that they're not going to be financially viable. They might not be
Exactly.
in business anymore. And on the other side, though, looking more at this opportunity, if you've got a good relationship of trust, when they've got a new product, they're going to come to you first.
That's
If
right.
they've got a new product which is sort of complementary to what you're doing, or maybe would give you an opportunity for that add-on sale, they're going to come to you first because you've got a great relationship with them. You're going to get first dibs at it. You're going to get that strategic advantage moving forward.
No doubt. The other thing that I think so many people unfortunately miss is I've always been one to believe that it's so important to refer your suppliers to others. And I'm talking, perhaps competitors or people that are in a similar space. But the stronger you make them, the better, in my view, and my experience has been, the better the relationship you have with that supplier and the better terms you're going to get, be it pricing, be it other terms, right? So I always am thinking about ways that I can enhance my suppliers' relationships with others in addition to mine because it only helps us.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a change. Coming back to that paradigm shift, that mindset change, that different way of viewing the business relationships we have. And look, we've had a number of interviews recently where we've been talking about how to get the best out of your employees and the relationships and how you sort of overcome all those quiet quitting and resentments and or resenteeism, which is a problem where employees turn up to work but they don't really want to be there and they're sort of sabotaging your business. But there are opportunities there for you as the owner. Now, we've got you on here as the expert in restructuring and turnaround. So we're talking about, and look, we've sort of sidestepped the idea of business in crisis at the moment, but we're talking more about prevention. But what are some of the reasons that businesses end up in a situation where they need to consider a restructure or a business turnaround?
Sure. And as I mentioned at the top, it can be your management team is just not cutting it. It can be that the company has taken on too much debt. And so when interest rates rise, let's say as an example, all of a sudden they're straddled and they can't, their cash is being eaten. Or it can be, the industry in which they operate. So a lot of factors, exist that can cause a company to all of a sudden find themselves in deep trouble. Couple of things that are absolutely critical at that juncture. The first one that I tell my clients, and I've told them for years and years, is please do not isolate your lender. Do not tell them things are good. Do not provide them with financial statements that are not accurate when things are going bad for you, as if you're going to be able to dig yourself out of that hole and keep the secret, right? And leave the lenders in the dark. That is a cardinal sin, but I see so many companies that I've stepped into that have done that at their peril. So it's critical that you establish and reestablish a line of communication with your lender and you let them know exactly where you are. And more importantly, here's how we're going to get out of it. But we're going to need your help. We're going to need, we need 6 months whereby we're not going to be able to pay interest or principal or whatever the case might be. Or we may need additional monies on our line of credit in this interim period. And then you give them a plan that demonstrates that you can come out of it. And that is a far better solution to the problem than hiding where you are, right? And look, you may be able to pull it off. Most times you can't. And secondly, if you do pull it off, it's only for a short period of time before the bank knows what's really going on. And then oftentimes what they'll end up doing is they'll foreclose on the debt and they'll throw the management team out. If the company's big enough and they feel like they can recover their debt, they'll throw the management team out. And I've seen that happen multiple times. In fact, I've been the guy that's been brought in by the lender as the new management, right? So it's a slippery slope when you're not being, honest with your lenders. So that's a big one for sure. The second one is companies that remain fiercely loyal to their management team and to a fault. So there can be, for instance, your CFO, let's say. Your CFO is, you were friends. You were friends in college. You hired him, and all of a sudden, he's been with you for 10, 12 years. You've grown, but he's not grown. In fact, he's holding you back. And so you're ignoring the tea leaves, right? And it's hurting you not only internally because you're not getting the information you need, but externally as well, because that person is not being able to communicate to third parties, be it investors, be it, suppliers, as we mentioned before. All of those relationships and all that it requires constant communication. And sometimes they're not up to the task, and you got to be able to move on.
Yeah. So you mentioned that communication, but also having the wrong person in that role. And you mentioned that friendship there, because I know a lot of businesses, particularly your small, medium business, turnover under 10 million,
Yep.
The guy that they've brought in, he's a mate.
That's right.
We went to school together, we went to uni,
right.
But did you actually apply the same process to appointing this guy as you would to appointing somebody external? And did you put in the same accountability requirements for your friend as you would for an external person?
That's right. And I've seen it firsthand, where not only did a few clients of mine bring in their friend ended up embezzling from them. Because what happens is they start to give their friend more and more access, right? So that same person is able to create a vendor, pay the vendor, right? Reconcile the bank account, do all of the steps that one shouldn't be doing, right? From an internal control standpoint, because that trust is so embedded. And I have seen cases where millions of dollars have been siphoned out of a business by that so-called friend.
Yeah. It is unfortunate, and people will say that's never going to happen.
Right.
But history is not littered, but there are so many examples throughout history of this occurring.
There are.
So accountability, having that right management team in place is a core strategy there. Now, we've also talking about some long-term businesses that encountered change, and I think we often focus on the businesses that don't last, but let's look at some of the longer-term businesses that may have been set up maybe in the 1980s, as an example. We're now in 2025. Should they keep operating with the same structure?
Great question. Those that were started in the 80s or 70s, right? I mean, tell me the industries that they're in. Are they a copier machine, a copier manufacturer, right? That thought that their gravy train was never to end, right? But no, one of the most critical things that a board can do, a management team can do, is to constantly look internally as to where they are versus where the environment is outside, right? Whether it's, what does a consumer need today? What does they want? What do they want? And then, of course, I remember a business professor saying to me many, many years ago, they said, IT is today, everybody has it. It's a necessity, but it's not a strategy, right? If you have the best IT system, good for you. But if you're relying on that as a strategy, you're dead in the water. So in today's world, we obviously have people working from home. You have generational issues that, candidly, in the States anyway, are real. The Gen Z is quite different from the others, and their expectations are quite different. So there's a lot of factors to that company in the 80s, and as they've moved into 2021, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? You would hope that they've downsized. You would hope that they have been smarter in how they've assembled, be if they're a manufacturer, how they're manufacturing today. If they're a service company, what are they doing from a customer service standpoint? How are they outsourcing that? Are they insourcing it? There's so many things that are different, as we both know, from that company in the 80s, 90s, and even the 2000s, right?
Yeah. So many differences there. And you mentioned Gen Z or Gen Z. And we've had this conversation recently as well, where what's very clear is that generation is looking for something completely different when it comes to looking at a business to what we are. And the statistic in Australia is that I think 50%, over 50% of small, medium-sized businesses are primarily owned by a male over the age of 50. All looking to exit. But the generations coming through, they're not interested in that kind of business structure.
Right.
So
right. No, it's an excellent point. And it's the gap. I mean, we call it generational gap, right? I mean, it's a phrase that's been used forever, but there truly is a gap today that I've never seen in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Just a completely different way of thinking. I mean, this company that I was in for 2024, effectively for the year, we were hiring people, and it's a really nice sized company. Everyone that we were looking to hire for two of the positions that we had open did not want to come into the office. They wanted to be able to work from home completely. And I said, you can't do that. I mean, interaction with other employees, and mind you, we had 190 employees. I mean, you can't be on an island. You got to be able to come in. And so, I mean, we went through several candidates because of that issue alone. So it's a challenge today.
Yeah, absolutely. So challenges exist everywhere. Like when I introduced you, I mentioned your quote about every challenge being an opportunity. I'd like to sort of give us a bit more idea of what you mean by that.
Sure. So, I'll give you an example, great example. When I stepped into a large aviation company right after 9/11, and we did repair work on aircraft parts for commercial airlines, as well as the heavy maintenance. So basically, it's akin to a complete engine overhaul for a car, right? So you're putting 20, 25,000 man hours on an aircraft, and you're following the FAA guidelines as well as Boeing and or Airbus's guidelines on how to do the maintenance, which, by the way, I'm here to tell you is a wonderful thing, because every I is dotted, every T is crossed. I mean, it's really amazing how much effort is put through that. But in the case of that industry, you had, in our case in South Florida, even back in, I'm talking 2005, 2006, you had illegals, or undocumented, I'll say, who were being trained and that were coming up the ranks as level 1 mechanics. Now, you had no papers on them. You certainly had no green card or things like that. They were basically coming up they were being hired in many cases off the streets. So I'm looking at that and this is again after 9/11. So you can, right? I mean, the FAA is everything is under close scrutiny. And so I looked at it and I said to my staff, my management team, and by the way, we would meet every week, and everybody on the team would be responsible for coming in and bringing a presentation about what's going on in their department, division, et cetera, that week and where they're going the following week. So, which is a great way to engage everybody and to make sure everybody knows what's going on. And communication, as we always know, is key. But in this case, I said to them in one of our weekly meetings, I said, why don't we start our own staffing company? And they looked at me like I had two heads. And I said, we don't know who we're putting on these aircraft today. We're paying these third-party contracting companies to put these people on our aircraft, and we really don't know who they are. For all we know, I mean, they could be tied to hijackers. Who knows? I said, but by creating our own staffing company, what does that do? Well, it makes us vet every one of them. It makes us document every one of them, right? And so you have a layer of protection right there and then. And then secondly, and more importantly, from a business standpoint, we were able to utilize that captive staffing company for our own aircraft at times where we were peaking during the year. And then when we had troughs, we would sell that labor to our competitors or others, be it local or otherwise. So there is an example of, all of a sudden it's an opportunity, but you got to see it and you got to take advantage of it.
Yeah. And I think one of the initial ways we'd look at that is go, right, we got this high risk of we don't know where these people are coming from. We just have to get rid of them. And all of a sudden, well, where do we get qualified labor from? Oh, we've got a labor shortage. We can't service, so we can't do our job. But no, I really love that approach to looking at it and saying, well, what can we do here to eliminate that risk, but also create a business opportunity at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, and I always tell, my clients and I tell management teams this all the time. You just, it's such a cliche, but you got to think outside the box. You really got to look at things differently through a different lens and don't rely strictly on your experience, your past, et cetera. But, what can we do differently here? What else can we do? And so I just think that's a critical approach, and particularly in a stressful or turnaround situation.
Yeah, great. Look, I think we've got so many businesses who are feeling stressed at the moment, confronted. Yeah, as we talked at the beginning, we talked about tariffs, we talked about trade barriers, we talked about employment issues, legislation. As a business owner, you're faced with so many, I guess, potential risks and issues, but there's also plenty of opportunity. If you want to find out more about how to sort of capture some of these opportunities or how you should perhaps look at your business and go through this process of assessing it, where it's at now, and does it need to be restructured? Do we need to change something critical in our business flows? Then I encourage you to get in contact with James at ACM Capital Partners. James, what's the best way for our listeners to get in touch with you?
Sure. So the website has contact information that they can put in. They can also email me directly. I'll always respond. It's jmartin@acmcapitalpartners.com. Our office is 305-960-8851. We have been in this particular, I created this firm in 2008. So right at the height of the financial crisis. And so we've been going strong ever since. And we've encountered, as we both know, two major issues during that time, right? You had the 2008 crisis and then you had COVID. So, and we've guided companies through both. So happy to help any way I can.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also noticed that, your experience is not just US based, but you've got experience with other countries as well. So you understand the issues, we understand the trade flows. So reach out to James and his team for some advice there, because look, tap into the experience of somebody else who can help you, because as a business owner, you've got so much going on, so many things to learn, so many things to do, and you don't need to wear all the hats. So tap into the resources that are available for you, get the right advice, and make sure that you're taking advantage of the opportunities, particularly when you're facing challenges.
No, absolutely, Paul. Well said. And just, if you can somehow check your ego, and look to bring in help, and do your homework on who the firm is and what they've done in the past. But once you get past that hurdle, don't be afraid to bring somebody in, because sure, in the short run, it may cost you a few dollars, but in the long run, it can prove invaluable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my final thought on that is, don't view it as a cost.
That's right.
View it as an asset, an investment in your business, an investment in your future.
That's exactly
if you
right.
start thinking cost, you're thinking that very limited view. Start thinking strategic. Start thinking it's an asset, and that's going to help you grow.
That's right. I couldn't have said it better.
I'm just summarising our conversation, James, and some of the great things that you've shared with us. So thank you again. It's been an absolute pleasure, and appreciate your time with us today.
Sure. Thank you, Paul. The best of luck.
That's a wrap for this episode of The Business Behind Your Business. We hope you found today's discussion insightful and valuable for your business journey. Before we go, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favourite platform. Share it with fellow business owners who could benefit, and send in your burning questions, because we love hearing from you. Missed any of our previous episodes or looking for additional resources to help grow your business? Head over to our website at thebusinessbehindyourbusiness.com. There you'll find our full archive of past episodes, along with show notes, transcripts, and links to valuable resources mentioned in each episode. Your journey to business success continues at thebusinessbehindyourbusiness.com. Until next time, stay inspired, stay informed, and keep building the business of your dreams.